Hi, my name is DJ, and I'm an eBay reseller, and I'm located in Central Texas. And what I wanted to do today for my second video was talk a little bit about the differences between Canadian eBay and US eBay, and particularly from a seller standpoint. Now, I have the unique opportunity to have sold in both markets. I started eBay in Canada, and where I've been selling for the last 3 years or so. And just in the last few weeks, I moved from Canada to the United States and now have my store active in the US. And so there are some differences that are pretty major between selling from Canada and the United States. And so I hope that if you're an American seller that this will be informative so you just understand what Canadian sellers are going through. And if you are a Canadian seller, maybe there'll be some tips here on how to be competitive with our US counterparts. I should say that just as a little background, for the last 3 years, I've been selling in Canada, and my work ended in Canada, and so I moved back to the United States. Now, in Canada, I was just a part-time seller. I sold maybe 1 or 2 hours a day. I would work on the eBay stuff, and sales for 250 item. More like a 220 item store, I thought were pretty good. I sold 1 to 2 items a day. And so in the last few weeks, I've moved to the United States, and I've had to transition my whole store from Canadian eBay to US eBay. Now, I'll talk about a few of those changes in a minute. But now I'm currently trying to do eBay full time. I thought that now would be the best opportunity with this move, and so I love doing it, and so I decided to just jump in and try to do eBay full time. And so I should say that when I moved from Canada to the United States, immediately I saw an increase of sales. With the same store, sales pretty much doubled. And when I was in Canada, I sold about 80% of my items to the United States. And then the rest went to Canada, and very few went international beyond the United States. And I think this is mainly due to the confidence of U.S. buyers. I think that U.S. buyers just feel more confident buying from other U.S. buyers. And for the most part, shipping from the United States to somewhere else in the United States is just simply cheaper. And so I think that U.S. buyers just simply want to buy from other U.S. buyers. Even though I did have a small handful buy from me in Canada. And that was really dependent upon the item. I think that if there was difficulty finding the item in the U.S., they would have no problem buying from Canada. But one of the major drawbacks from me selling in Canada was that when I sold to the U.S., for the most part, there was no tracking. Unless the item was over 2.5 pounds or 1 kilogram, there would be no tracking, and so I would always take a risk of the item being lost or the buyer saying they didn't receive the item. And so I always dreaded when someone emailed me while I was in Canada asking for a tracking number, because there just simply wasn't one. Fortunately, I can say honestly that with over probably 1,000 sales, maybe 2 or 3 ever got lost or claimed to have been lost. And so the lack of tracking for international shipping was one of the drawbacks for selling in Canada. Now, you could do tracking, but it just made the shipping cost so high that it was less likely that U.S. buyers would purchase from me. So if I sold a shirt, for example, I could send it to the U.S. for about $6 to $7, and but it had no tracking on it. And to put tracking, you would make it like $10 or $12, and for a shirt. And so I think you'd have to send it expedited from Canada, and it just became made it too hard to compete in the U.S. market. So shipping is more expensive from Canada to the U.S. and from shipping across Canada. Many times it was cheaper for me to sell to the United States than or to ship to the United States rather than shipping to Canada. And people in Canada would complain, why is it cheaper to ship to the United States than to ship to me here in Canada? It just was. I can't explain it. This was for the most part for items that were under 250 grams, under 500 grams, or under a kilogram. It was just simply cheaper to ship to the United States. And Canadian shipping is expensive. And so what I would do to remain competitive as a Canadian seller, I would subsidize quite a bit. I would subsidize my shipping. I would lower my price a little bit just so I could be competitive in the American market. And so you might want to consider that in your reselling strategy. A great bonus, though, and one of the things that I think equalizes Canadian eBay with US eBay, at least right now, is the exchange rate. And what I'm talking about here is money conversion. Now, my store has always been based in Texas. I'm from Texas. I'm a U.S. citizen that was living in Canada. So my store was always based in the U.S. I used a U.S. bank account while I was in Canada. And so I did all my transactions and all my funds in U.S. currency. And so roughly the exchange rate was 80 cents Canadian to $1 U.S. So I always, as a Canadian seller, got like it felt like a bonus. It really isn't, but it felt like a bonus. So what I would do is I would go to Google, and if you put in on Google like USD, which is the United States dollar, to CAD, which is the Canadian dollar, it automatically brings up an exchange rate calculator. And so if I paid $1 for something in Canada, it was 80 cents US. And so when I did my inventory, when I put how much my cost of goods were, I would always do the conversion to American dollars, because my base finance structure for my business is the US dollar. And so already you get 20% off the item when you are working in the US dollar. And I know a lot of people in Canada don't work in the US dollar, but that's how I worked. And then when I sold the item on eBay, I sold it using the US dollar. And so I never worked in Canadian dollars. I always worked in US dollars. And one, because 80% of my sales were to the US. And so it just made sense that we would use the US dollar. And so when I sold something, when I converted from American money to Canadian money, it was always, you would always get an exchange rate benefit from that. US money is worth more in the Canadian market. And so the exchange rate is a great bonus for Canadian sellers, especially if you're working across the border. Now, another difference in the two eBays is postage. For the first part, Canadians ship in grams and kilograms. And, in my opinion, it's a much better system. It's easier to use. But when I changed my store from Canadian to the US, it took me quite a bit of time to go through all my items. I had to reweigh all my items to 2 pounds and ounces, and just because the U.S. Shipping structure, postage structure is just completely different, and so whereas if you're under 250 grams, it was one price in Canada. If you're under 500 grams, it was another price. Under 1 kilogram, it was another price. In the U.S., if you're under a pound, 16 ounces, then you can ship first class, and then you can ship priority above that. And so it just took some learning. I had to watch quite a bit of YouTube videos to re-understand the U.S. shipping structure, and it took a lot of bit of work, quite a bit of work. It took me about a week to convert my store from all my items, go through all my inventory, and convert the shipping for all the items. Next, the great thing about Postage in the U.S. is that you get free shipping supplies. That's just awesome, and they deliver it to my door. Boxes, especially for priority mail, all comes to your door. You just go onto the site and order it. And in addition to that, you can schedule a pickup at your front door. I live in an area where there's a community post office area or a postal area where you go check your mail, but you can schedule for them to come to my door and pick up boxes and pick up packages, which is great. In Canada, I had to go every day to a store and drop my packages off. And many times that was just really inconvenient. And third is global shipping. In the U.S., you have the global shipping program, and I didn't know quite how that would work, but all of a sudden I just noticed items being shipped to Kentucky, and you really can't tell a difference when you're a U.S. seller. I just have it already put in my shipping structure on eBay.com. And it just goes international. I hardly notice where it's going, and so the global shipping program is great. Tracking is another great thing. Everything you ship has tracking, and it seems like it has tracking. I haven't yet, after 3 weeks of selling in the United States, I've yet to come across a package I've shipped that didn't have tracking. The other drawback to selling in Canada for me, because I was in Regina, Saskatchewan, which is in central Canada, it's in the prairies, was just the lack of places to source. I think in my city of Regina, I had 4 thrift stores I could go to, and I could hit all 4 of those in just 3 or 4 hours, and they were small compared to thrift stores here in the United States. San Antonio is my closest city, and there's probably 20, 30 thrift stores that you can go to real easily. And then garage sales are more year-round here in Texas than they were in Canada. In Canada, the garage sales were roughly March through October, and then you had snow, and so you were waiting for garage sale season to happen. And so sourcing is a lot better here in the United States, at least where I was. Unless you're in Canada in one of the major cities like Toronto or maybe Vancouver or Montreal, most of the cities across Canada are just really small, and so sourcing is a little bit tougher. I would have to source things from Facebook groups or Garage Sale or Kijiji up in Canada, but it's a lot, I believe, a lot simpler, a lot easier here in the United States. If you can think of any differences, please feel free to leave a comment. Please like and subscribe as I try to grow my channel. I'm happy to be here in the United States. I'm happy to be selling in the U.S. market, and I think for the size of store I have, I'm getting close to 300 items in my store, which is When I came, it was 220, and I think the store is doing pretty good. And I'm trying to grow this business into something that I can really use for a full-time income. And I just have a few months to do it. And so, if you have any suggestions, please feel free to leave a comment, and I'll talk to you later.